tell us why, like what got you into being an entrepreneur? Why are you here in this world today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you again for that introduction, Sam. I don't know. I have such respect for entrepreneurs. I feel kind of a kindred spirit with them because I know the struggle firsthand. But I also know what it's like to feel the reward of success, and in that struggle kind of makes it all worth it. So I love to have conversations with these small business owners. I worked in corporate real estate through college, and then for a couple of years out of college. I graduated college in 1999, and it was a corporate deal. So for me personally, it was honestly kind of like, I realized, kind of soul crushing to be in a corporate job and parking in a parking garage, going into an office, the bureaucracy of it. And I kind of knew right away that this wasn't the path for me personally. So I think entrepreneurship is something that you have to be passionate about. It's in your soul. It's in your kind of fiber in your being. And I enjoy seeing that in other people. So that's kind of why I've always, representing sellers is kind of a perfect fit for me, and always kind of has been.
That's awesome. And Ian, what about you? Why are you in the entrepreneur world?
Yeah, a lot of what Chris just said really applies to my approach as well and experiences. I've always seen it as a really exciting and creative avenue to kind of express yourself and create something in the world that others can appreciate and get value from. And also just a way to kind of live a really fulfilling life, with the freedom to kind of work for yourself and travel. And, the online space really caters to people who want to kind of have that blend of a fulfilling life with also fulfilling work. So I just became passionate about that at a young age, studied entrepreneurship in college, started a business to kind of put my way through that and travel, and later got into the online space. And Quiet Light has really just been a perfect fit because it's a team of entrepreneurs who have kind of a similar vision and values for kind of helping other entrepreneurs succeed. So yeah, really excited about it and glad to be here.
All right. Okay, let's get into some of the good stuff. So at Quiet Light specifically, I mean, maybe elsewhere, but we really talk about timing of when you sell your business. So my question for you guys is, does timing matter? Like, does it matter how old your business is or how young it is? Does that make a difference in the exit process? What's your guys' perspective on that?
Ian, you want me to take this one
first?
Yeah,
go for it, Chris. Yeah.
Okay. So age of business, for me, there's no real kind of black and white answer. And I'll explain why. The reason I say that is, like, for instance, in 2021, I took on an engagement for a company that was 10 months old, which the reason I did is I had a good feeling about the sellers. Clearly their business had taken off almost from day one. They're in the infrared space, in an e-commerce business. And so I kind of took a risk taking that on, but I think the risk was worth it. And then on the other hand, I've taken on engagements maybe that were, the business was 20, 21 years old, where you could really see some stagnation with the top line revenue, which leads buyers to the question of, well, what am I supposed to do to get something that's 2 decades old and grow it? And is it tapped out? So those are like extreme examples, obviously, but I think there's no cut and dry answer. I think generally speaking, we'd like to see, in general, I think you kind of say 18 months to 2 years minimum. I would say I'd like to see 2.5 years. And the reason I kind of say specifically 2.5 years is that probably means you've got 2 years worth of tax returns. And we can kind of go into that later, why that's important. But I think that would kind of be, if you had to kind of put a number to it, that's kind of the number I would say.
Got it. Yeah, I think I know Joe Valley, for those of you who might be familiar with him, he's one of our co-founders. He always touts about 1 to 2 years, but I think that's interesting. The 2 years, you have that true year over year, those metrics to look at for sure. Which maybe segues nicely into the valuation of your business. And everyone always wants the highest value, of course, who wouldn't want that? But besides just, being 2.5 years old, what else can people do when they're thinking about increasing the value of their business?
Chris, do you want me to dive in here?
Go for it, Ian. Yeah,
cool. Sure. Yeah, great question. Obviously something everyone wants to know. At Quiet Light, we talk a lot about the 4 pillars of value. And this is really kind of what drives the value of all online businesses and businesses in general. And those are growth, risk, transferability, and documentation. So growth really refers to your previous growth history, especially over the last 12 months. Everyone wants to, buyers want businesses that have positive growth trends, as well as that show promise for the future, that, have untapped opportunities that could lead to growth if you pull the right levers. And then risk, obviously, just kind of refers to threats or challenges that could cause the business to decrease or could basically cause problems for a buyer after they acquire. And age is one of those variables that Chris was just talking about. If a business has a little bit more history, it shows that it's, made it through that startup phase and is a little bit more established. Transferability really, is how easy it is for a business to transfer from one owner to the next. If you have a brand, if you have a company that is really tied to your own identity or requires highly specialized knowledge in order to manage, or doesn't have any kind of systems in place to run, that's going to be a lot more difficult than one in which the owner is really kind of outside of the business and the business is relatively systematized and automated and has everything dialed in that a new owner could just pick up and succeed with on day one. And the documentation is, kind of as the term implies, is really just how well documented the business is. And this includes the financials, making sure that there's, P&Ls on a monthly accrual basis, especially for e-commerce businesses, so that the potential buyers can really understand what's happening in that business in a very granular level. And then also standard operating procedures, SOPs, that really spell out how a business should be managed so that the new owner can have a roadmap to succeed. So those are kind of the 4 areas, and a lot of things that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this are going to really fall into one of those. And there's definitely more. You have to calculate SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, and a number of other things, but that's kind of the high level framework. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it perfectly. Yeah. Those are really, there's no doubt about it. Those are kind of the foundational aspects of value. Clearly there's 100 other things that kind of fall into those kind of 4 categories, but yeah, you covered it perfectly.
We just got actually a question about the 4 pillars. So I'll just ask that now since we're talking about it. Is there an order in which these 4 pillars occur as you build your business, or are they all simultaneous activities? Thank you for that question. Do you want me to repeat it? Are you guys?
It's a great question. Chris,
yeah.
do you want to go for it, or you want me to?
I'll
go for it.
Have a part of it. I think as far as an order, it's I think organically those aspects kind of take place. I think the first one that probably takes place is your documentation. So, right off the bat, I would say get a third-party accounting software, QuickBooks, or, if you're Amazon Business Zero or one of those, and keep really good records, like Ian mentioned. Right off the bat, get your standard operating procedures down pat, get them written, even consider getting a library together of Loom videos of what you do every day. So I think documentation is really important. It's debatable on how it weighs in the 4 pillars, but I think it's probably the first thing that you can address, because I think risk is associated with the older the business, the less perceived risk; the younger the business, the more perceived risk. So you really can't affect that other than to continue to run your business. And I would say, I don't know if you agree, but same with growth. It's like you can't have growth until you've been around for a while to see if you've had growth. So.
Yeah, I totally agree that all makes perfect sense. And one thing to just note here is I think that, once you kind of have started your business, you should really be aware of all of these pillars throughout. You don't want to be so focused on growth. You just say you have a Amazon or e-commerce business and you have one hero SKU. I mean, that's great that maybe that took off and you got some early success, but you want to make sure that you have more than just one product that is performing well in order to minimize the risk of your business. And that's something that a buyer is going to look at, but that's also just something for yourself that, you don't want to own a risky business that could implode at any second. So you want to And the same is true for,
You can speak for yourself. You know, some of us are just living on the edge.
yeah. I mean, we're all entrepreneurs, right? But you still, you know, everyone wants to kind of make sure that their business is as stable as possible. And you don't want to be, you know, also confused about what's happening within your business. So that's where documentation really plays a critical role, to make sure that you have systems in place, that you have things organized, so that not only can the next owner enjoy that, but you can enjoy that while you're the owner. So you're not like scrambling and putting out fires mode the whole time. I know a lot of entrepreneurs live in that space, but if possible, it's best to get out of that as soon as possible so that you can really focus on more high leverage activities.
Yeah. And that probably segues into a question that I have, is that, and I think the question that we just got, and thank you so much for that. And if anyone else has other questions, again, throughout the next 40 minutes or so, feel free to put them into that Q&A chat box and we will get to them in real time. So that question, I think, was a little bit about prioritization, right? Like, as you're approaching your exit goal, what are the milestones you have to be hitting? So like, let's talk about performance trends. Are there certain metrics people should be focused on, or trends that will matter more long-term? Like, you should hit this goal in revenue before you want to sell, or things like that. Can you guys speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Ian, do you want to take this or you want me to?
Sure. I can start off and then maybe you can jump in. Cool.
Yeah.
So yes, there are definitely core metrics that you want to pay most attention to. And one is SDE, your earnings. You want to make sure that you have positive growth trend with that. I mean, really anything you want to like constantly be optimizing whatever is most important for your business, and different businesses are different. Content sites might pay more attention to page views as a leading indicator. E-commerce sites, they want to, like, traffic is definitely an important one, and then kind of conversion rates. You want to be focusing on everything that really is important for the success of that business and show positive movement. But really, the main ones is kind of your earnings, and then in all cases, revenue is also something to look at. Sometimes that's especially important, especially in SaaS businesses, software businesses that have grown to a certain point. In that case, revenue can actually become more important valuation metric, but I don't know if we need to go into that too much here, because most other businesses, it's really, based on an SDE multiple. Yeah, so I would say those are the most important growth metrics. I was also going to mention, as far as revenue and SDE, you want to, if there is a discrepancy in the trend of earnings to revenue, that's something to pay attention to. If you're approaching selling your business, you never want to say cut advertising to reduce your ad expense, which would then maybe decrease your revenue slightly while increasing your earnings, because that will lead to a later decrease in earnings, which is really not good for the buyer. And any smart buyer is going to see that, and it's really going to come back to you. So always, this is kind of a separate thing, but always lead your business, always manage your business with the buyer in mind, like thinking of their best interests, and run your business as if you're going to run it forever, so that the new owner can be in a good place. And I know that's kind of like meandering a little bit, but I just wanted to point that out about revenue and SDE. But Chris, anything to add there?
No, I think you're right. I think the metrics, and this could also be if trends aren't positive. We kind of talked before about course correcting. I think, as you mentioned, it really partly depends on the type of business that you have, the type of online business that you have. So, I'd say first, at the heart of it, I think each business owner probably knows better than we do as advisors what they really need to do to in the event they need to turn things around, and how to execute that. But I think in general, if you have a FBA business, there's going to be a set of things, what I would call basic foundational things that you can do, getting back to the basics to make sure, all the basic stuff. Are your listings optimized? are the products that you're thinking about adding, have they been vetted, sourced, and branded, and are they ready to go live? If they go live, do you have a captive audience of people who have already bought from your brand that you can immediately market to and start getting those reviews? Are your pay-per-clicks optimized? If you're just an e-commerce business without much Amazon presence, what other things have you done to increase the channels, the revenue channels? Like, have you considered Walmart.com? Have you considered increasing your Shopify business, traffic directly to your site? Have you considered going into brick and mortar? I mean, that's something that so many people overlook, and it's kind of zigging when other people are zagging, but there's a whole industry of online private labelers that go wholesale to brick and mortar and get some huge big ticket sales to chain retailers. So that's something. So there's all kinds of ways with content sites. Maybe it's typical SEO stuff. Obviously that's important, but maybe you consider YouTube videos to drive traffic. Things that often are overlooked, I think, can be keys to kind of increasing your revenue or getting things turned around if things have gone kind of sideways.
Yeah, a lot of creative ways that you just mentioned, I think, that don't always come up when you're just Googling, how to scale my business, which I think is great. I think especially now when there's, so many online businesses, or so many different ways you can grow, to actually consider some of those that are maybe more outside of the box. I think that's awesome. So here's another question for you, which I think comes up in some of our other webinars as well, about being SBA qualified or pre-qualified, I should say. Is that something that people should be focused on or concerned with? What exactly does that entail and mean? I think a lot of people aren't necessarily even sure what that qualification gets them. Chris, I don't know if you can speak to this, or Ian, but I would be curious to hear.
Sure, I can start if you want me to.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, this is me personally, having done this for a while. I think it's really important if you can get the business SBA pre-qualified, that's great. And I think it's important to know that, the SBA is not the lender. They are guaranteeing the loan for lenders that are SBA preferred lenders. So that's an important distinction to kind of make. But if you just look at it as, if I have let's call it $1 million listing that goes out to market, if I don't have an SBA pre-qualified, then I'm going to have to find a buyer that has essentially $1 million cash to purchase that business. So if I have that same business SBA pre-qualified, then I'm most likely going to have to find a buyer with about 20% down, possibly less, but let's just say 20% conservatively speaking. So I'm going to have to find a buyer with $200,000 down. So just, very easily you can see and understand the difference between having a pool of buyers with $1 million versus the greatly expanded pool of buyers that has $200,000. So I think SBA pre-qualification is so important to put other buyers on notice that the seller has this option. I think it puts upward pressure on valuation. I think it puts cash buyers on notice. I think so. I think it's hugely important, and it doesn't mean that you have to go with a buyer that needs an SBA loan. It just needs to be an option that's recognized by everyone. And then I also think one thing that's often overlooked is we always just look at it from the seller's business side of the equation, but it's really important when we're looking at buyers, to find a buyer that is really strong, because that is really, when it comes to SBA preferred lenders, the borrower and their strength is equally important to the seller's side. So, it's not just the buyer's financial situation, their liquidity, their balance sheet, their credit score, but it's also, is the lender comfortable with the borrower's ability to run the business that they're acquiring? Does the borrower have relatable, transferable experience that makes the lender comfortable? So I think it's important just to realize that both sides of that coin are really important in the SBA process.
Yeah, I love everything Chris said there. The one other thing maybe to put out there, it's my understanding that a lot of times SBA deals can take a bit longer. There's more steps, there's more approvals that you need to go through in order to get the loan approved. And that can just make deals take a bit longer and have a few more hurdles. But as Chris said, it can be well worth it. And also just by expanding your pool of buyers, you just are likely to get a better purchase price in the end. So.
Is there a certain time or, within growing your business when you should start thinking about that? Or is it like, day one you can start? Or is it something that only if you're really approaching an exit?
Well, I would say you should think about it from day one if you have that luxury of having that knowledge. And what I mean by that is, essentially what any lender is going to look at is the seller's tax returns. So it's not that they don't care about your P&Ls, but when they are qualifying a deal, they're really looking at your last at least 2 years worth of tax returns. And if you're older than that, sometimes it's 3 years, but a minimum of 2 years tax returns. And if you've run a bunch of personal stuff through your tax return and it's showing less net income than you're truly making, and they aren't things that the lender would recognize, like if you have a salary that you take as a business owner and health insurance, those are things that the lender will add back as we would on a P&L. But if you're running, a whole bunch of personal stuff, like you're remodeling your house and you ran all those supplies through cost of goods and now your profitability is depressed artificially, the lender doesn't make that distinction. So to them, it just looks like a less profitable business than the P&Ls are showing, and they defer to the tax return. So I think as a business owner, you have to weigh, when do you plan on selling? Try to have a map for that. But is it worth saving whatever? I'm not an accountant, but 20% on your taxable net income for a couple of years? Or is it worth showing another dollar worth of income and attaching a 3-time or 4-time, let's say, multiple to that? And without question, the highest return is going to be, bite the bullet, pay the taxes, show the income, because it'll pay off in spades when you go to sell the business 2 or 3 years down the road.
Got it. Makes sense. And I know you mentioned you wanted to revisit tax returns earlier. So I don't know if you feel like you've, exhausted your tax return chat, or if there's anything else you guys want to talk about in terms of the P&L and tax world.
Do you want?
Go ahead, Ian. Yep.
Okay. And maybe I'll say a few things about P&Ls and then you can jump in with taxes. Okay. So P&Ls, profit and loss statements. So these are super important when you're selling your business, and it kind of wraps in with what you're talking about earlier about documentation. A potential buyer's ability to see and understand what's happening in your business is absolutely essential in order to sell it, because no one's going to buy your business if they can't see what's happening. No smart buyer is going to buy it if they can't understand what's going on inside your business in order to value it and just to feel confident that they can succeed. And one of the most important things for providing that transparency is your P&Ls. And ideally, it should be done with accrual accounting as opposed to cash. And you should be able to provide these on a monthly basis. And the reason is that when you're able to see accrual monthly statements, you're able to understand the trends within the business, positive and negative, and really see the nature of the business in terms of seasonality and just kind of over the long term, what's happening there. And as well as look at individual expenses and really see what percentage of the total expenses, for example, that represents. So you can really see the expenses on a more granular level, revenue, and just gain a much broader understanding of what's happening in the business. And it's also worth mentioning that as an owner, as a potential seller, these are also really helpful while you're running the business. So there's no reason you should wait until you're about to sell in order to take the step. You should really do this as early as possible and make it just a priority to stay on top of your accounting and bookkeeping in order to make the most sound decisions in your business based on what's happening, as well as to sell, or as well as to show potential buyers this when it's, you're getting to that selling process. Chris, anything to add, or do you want to tie this into taxes or?
No, I think you're spot on. I think, again, I just think the tax returns, it's just going to be a question each seller is going to have to ask themselves and see what they're comfortable with, because, maybe, maybe you plan on running the business for 20 years and all that tax savings will add up over time. But usually that's not the case. So if you can kind of forego short-term benefits of, minimizing your taxes a little bit for the much greater future benefit of showing more income to the bottom line, and potentially being able to get SBA pre-qualification and what that does to your, to the valuation, and then increasing the pool of buyers, which also, should theoretically increase the valuation and offers that you get. I think if you just put pen to paper and do the math, I think having your tax returns more reflective of your accrual P&Ls, Ian, like you mentioned, I think is a really good strategy.
Yeah, completely. If just to say one more thing about cash versus accrual, just to kind of illustrate that for anyone who's not, who doesn't know, cash accounting is really going to lead to the appearance of lumpy earnings. And what I mean by this is, let's say you have an e-commerce business and you order $100,000 of inventory in May, for example, and that leads to $200 of sales in the following 3 months, and you're not making any inventory purchases during that period of time. Like, this is a very simplified example, but you're going to have a big expense in May and then really high profits for the following months with no expenses during those months. So this is obviously not really what's happening in your business, but this is what cash accounting will reflect. But if you do accrual accounting, you're actually going to attribute that inventory purchase expense in the months that it's incurred. So it'll show a much more consistent, sales trajectory that's reflective of your actual volume that your business is generating and profitability. So
yeah,
it's one of the,
which is never a bad thing, I would say. Yeah. We do have a question from someone viewing, so I'm going to get to that one next. Does the pre-exit checklist change if you're selling to an aggregator versus independent buyer? Which I know is always, I think these types of questions always come up in our webinars. So curious what you guys think about that. And thank you for the question. And for anyone else who has questions, we still have about 30 minutes left. And so it's not too late. You can plop those questions into the Q&A chat box at any time. And back over to you guys for my little PSA is over.
Well, I would say, first of all, thank you for the questions, guys. Like, we love like Q&A, and that kind of interaction is fun for us. So that's versus us kind of talking. And I hope it doesn't sound like we're lecturing or anything, but so, for me, the aggregator kind of model in that new market, I guess you could say, of buyers, that hasn't always been the case. So I started representing sellers in 2003, and the aggregator buyer, I just really wasn't aware of till, 4 years ago or so. And that pool of buyers is, if you believe what you read in the news, it's in flux a little bit. So we don't really know what's going on. It's a new industry. They're doing new things. And so obviously there's probably growing pains, as you would expect. But I think from a pre-launch checklist, if I'm recalling the question correctly, I think it doesn't change from the standpoint of always go back to the basics. Think about the foundational aspects of value. Think about, how you want to get your business set up. The more organized you are, the more documented you are, the more you're forward thinking about transferability and removing yourself from the business, the brand. If you get to a level where revenue is really increasing and you can't just do it yourself, hiring people to create a layer between you and being the owner operator and then being able to run the business. If you just approach it from looking at it how a buyer would look at it and what they would think is an ideal situation, that's how I would approach getting everything set up. I don't know, Ian, what's your thought on if there would be any difference? Well, with an aggregator, I would tell you that the SBA side of it probably becomes much more unnecessary because they're usually cash buyers. So that might be one difference if you just wanted to take the SBA off the table and you didn't want to deal with individual buyers. But I would personally, I would not advise for that. I would advise to keep the pool of buyers as wide open as possible. But Ian, I'd be interested in your thoughts on it.
No, that's, yeah. I don't know that I can really offer too much that you didn't already mention, Chris. I don't know. There's a number of other things about selling to aggregators, but as far as a kind of checklist, I don't feel that really changes it based on what I know.
Yeah,
go for it.
I was just, it's something popped in my head. I mean, if you have an Amazon, because when we're talking about aggregators, what we're really saying is Amazon FBA businesses. Really, I think they dabbled in purchasing content sites for a little bit there, but I don't know that ever gained steam. But from that perspective, maybe, I think aggregators are probably much more savvy from the standpoint of specifically with regards to kind of the intricacies of an Amazon FBA business. So they have their own internal checks and balances and ways of looking at listings and optimization. And they're usually really good at, Amazon pay-per-click, and they're really good at, creating email lists and getting reviews, or at least understanding who's really good at that, what sellers are really good at that. So, I guess it would depend on what way you're leaning, but if you would like an aggregator to purchase you, just try to be as educated as you can on how to optimize your listings and they're really, brand is really important. Like, there's aggregators out there that some are really more concerned with your brand than they are you an Amazon FBA business specifically? So, really a good brand, differentiate your products. Don't be a spatula from Alibaba that you put your label on. If you're going to have products, try to differentiate them, specialize them, customize them, and then kind of create a brand around that differentiation.
Yeah. And you guys talked a little bit, and again, thank you for that question. I hope we answered it for you. If you have any follow-ups, obviously feel free to type those into the Q&A chat box, or any new questions. We're still accepting those. But you guys talked a little bit about transferability. So maybe we can talk about that, because it sounds like whether you're planning to sell or not, whether you're thinking about selling to an aggregator or an individual buyer, or keeping the pool open, as you mentioned, at some point, you'll probably need to transfer all of your business to someone else. So can we talk a little bit about that process? Is there a strategy people can put in place? I know documentation has been mentioned a bunch. Obviously, that would be helpful. Are there other tactics people can think about when they're thinking about literally transferring their seller account, their business to someone else?
Totally. Chris, do you want me to start this one off?
Yeah, go for it, Ian. Yeah.
So some of these things we touched on earlier, and this really has to do with SOPs, making sure that things are really clear within your business. If you're running your business yourself and you know how it runs, so you don't document everything, and it's pretty normal for owners to do that, at least in the beginning. Really, your business is going to be much more transferable if you sit down and you create SOPs for all of the key activities that your business requires in order to run successfully. So this includes roles that you're doing, any employees or contractors are doing, so that it's everything within your business, all the operational components are replaceable by the buyer. Once they take it over, they can kind of understand how everything goes. So that's a huge one. There's a number of other potential transferability issues. If your business requires that you hold some kind of special license or qualification as an individual in order to run, that could significantly limit your pool of buyers. Not saying that it's impossible to sell by any means. People sell, we don't do this kind of thing, but people do sell dentist practices or doctor practices. They just need to find a dentist or a doctor who can take that over. So if you run a business that does require something like that, you're just going to have a smaller pool of buyers. Yeah, those are the main things that come to my mind. Chris, is there any other big things there for transfer? Oh, one other thing maybe before that is just if your likeness is really tied to your brand, like say you have a blog and everything is in your voice, photos of you, videos of you, that could potentially be an issue as well, unless somehow there was assurance that you're going to continue running that business even under the ownership of someone else, which if you're trying to sell your business, you probably want to step away from that. So whenever possible, trying to replace yourself or phase your own likeness out of the business, be it a blog or content site or something like that, as much as possible. And then don't do that and then immediately sell. Do that and then let the business continue running and show that it can succeed without you being there with your face and voice for a period of time before selling, because that'll really, make your business much more transferable. Chris, what?
Yeah, those great points, Ian. I think your last point too is so important. I just had a conversation with a really great lady. She owns an agency, a digital marketing agency, and it's the URL is her name, like first and last name. The website is her and her family. She does all the intake with as far as consultations with new potential clients. And so we talked like 2 days ago, kind of about valuation. And so it's not impossible to sell something like that, but you have to put strategies in place. She needs to, we talked about her separating herself as much as possible. We can't really change the URL at this point because there's recognition there, but she's willing, is she willing to stay on in a expanded consultancy role past the normal training and transition, which she is? Are you willing to take a little bit less cash up front and do an earn out and kind of get some skin in the game, put your money where your mouth is, sort of a thing, and give the buyer some, try to mitigate the buyer's risk a little bit and give them some comfort going forward. And then small strategies, like instead of her just being the owner on the website, maybe the new buyer is now a co-owner, and you kind of seamlessly introduce that new person, which kind of also leads to the point of, when it comes to transition, how do you handle that as a seller with your employees or contractors that you have? And so I think that's a kind of an important aspect, is because a lot of sellers are very nervous about, are their employees going to be taken care of? They're worried that their employees are thinking, gosh, if we sell, are we going to get fired? And then conversely, a buyer is thinking, are we going to have like a mass exodus the minute I take over the business? So what I try to explain to sellers is, and buyers, is you guys are really, by the nature of the transaction, you're kind of mutually aligned from that regard, because really what it is employees or contractors probably don't want to lose their job and have to look for another one. And buyers clearly don't want an upheaval. They want business to continue on as normal, right? And so I think it's really more about how you handle the transition once the business has been sold. And I think it's can be as simple as how you present it to the employees or contractors. And you've brought in somebody that's going to take over the business. If there's any type of seller note or earnout, it's really, you can say that they're a partner, because that's the reality of it in a way. And that, the new buyer is excited to take the business to a new level. There's new energy. We expect that you guys as employees can grow with the business. So I think it's really being honest with the employees, and then, addressing it right away, and then showing them why it's going to be beneficial for them going forward and why it should be a win-win for everybody.
That's great. We have another question from a viewer. So thank you for that. How do you see the current economy and marketplace affecting the buying and selling industry? I'm sure everyone's the recession, or, whatever you want to categorize it as we get into it, is obviously on everyone's mind. So I think this is a question we probably saw coming. So thank you for sending it in. Someone had to do it. And I'll leave it to you guys.
Ian, what do you think? You wanted to go for it? You want me to, or?
I can say a few things, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Sure.
So no doubt it affects things. I think it's easy in any kind of market to get, to look to what's happening and think, how's that going to affect me and all that. And before kind of addressing that, I just want to say that, there's what's happening in the world, and then there's what's happening in your business and your life. And the market is still there. Like there's still a lot of wonderful opportunities to sell your business. So I think that the market definitely is a relevant factor, but if it's time for someone to sell, and this has to, this includes like what's happening within your business, and then there's what's happening within yourself. So there's like, if it's the time for you to sell for a life transition, an opportunity, buying a house or whatever it is, that's important to think about too. It's not only about kind of market and things like that. Not saying this person asking this question is thinking in those terms, but just want to put that out there that, it's important to kind of think about yourself and your own business. I think the market could make things slow down a bit. I think that's definitely the case to some degree, but there's still a place for good businesses. There's still a really strong market for good businesses. But Chris, I know you're probably much more on the front line, seeing kind of how the market is affecting things. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. And, I agree with everything you said. And Sam, we kind of talked it was 2 days ago, but you had the forethought to realize that this could be a question. So yeah, I'm glad you had that kind of forethought there. I think, first, we're all disclaimer here, and we're not economists, right? But I personally think you can't predict, right now it seems as if it's a foregone conclusion that there's a recession right around the corner. And I don't know that for a fact. Based on Sam's kind of question to us, I kind of Googled it. And if you Google recession worries, you'll see like there's major signals in 2019 that a recession was looming like right then and there. There was no doubt about it. And I think that's just kind of a illustration of, we just don't know what's going to happen, a month from now, 3 months from now, a year from now. So in my opinion, I've been, when I started in this industry, it was just off of the .com bubble. So things were weird, and I hit the ground running. And then I experienced the Great Recession, the financial crisis. That was kind of weird. It affected lending a little bit. So it changed the environment. But what stayed constant was I always had sellers wanting to sell. I always had buyers that needed to buy businesses. Some of the aspects of those sellers and buyers changed because of the economic conditions, for sure. But it didn't change the fact that work needed to get done and transactions were happening. And I don't recall, I don't have really data for this, but I don't recall any noticeable major reduction in volume or things of that nature. Prices and valuations may have been depressed a little bit, but that's really a function of math and the economy and revenue, companies, different revenues. And it's like, as an example, in 2021, we had so many sellers at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 that we all, and this, I'm guilty of it, we all were, of capital gains rates are about to double, or maybe even, basically double. You're talking about 20% to 40%. Nothing could be more like detrimental to a business owner. Capital gains rates are way better than paying income tax rates in most instances, but doubling your capital gains would just, another 20% off of what you're walking away from the table with. And we had, so many sellers that wanted to sell in 2021 because of the proposed capital gains tax rates, which were happening. I mean, we all thought they were happening, foregone conclusion. And same thing, it just never came to fruition. So I think it's, at the end of the day, it's just hard to predict. So I personally I don't put a ton of focus on that. I try to kind of keep my head down and, do what I know how to do, which is represent sellers and find buyers and try to, work through the transaction, quarterback it. So.
Yeah, it sounds like running your business shouldn't change, and no one should be, like highly deviating from the plan that they have in place. And as you said, sellers are still looking to sell, buyers are still looking to buy. So the dynamics might change, but the marketplace isn't going anywhere.
Right.
We have another question. Thank you again for all the questions. We love them. We still have a few more minutes. So if you have a couple extra questions, it's not too late. What are the biggest holes you've seen in an online business looking for evaluation? So I think in terms of, and maybe even in your own experiences, if you have examples of what you were looking to sell, and then, all of a sudden there was this area that definitely needed to be resolved or improved upon. I know we kind of talked about metrics earlier, but I think I gather this question is maybe thinking about examples of just cases where you've said, I think we need to fix this before we take you to market.
I'll just start with one thing I know of is just financials, which we've kind of covered already, but people, sellers come with incomplete or non-existent financials, and that's kind of the first thing that need to be cleaned up. And then really issues in any of the areas we already mentioned. If there's just a lot of risk in the business, if it's just fraught with risk, it's a young business, it doesn't have a long-term strategy in place, that might be a situation in which we'd say, hey, go address these things and then come back to us in a year. Or any issues with transferability, like we've talked about, or, SOPs in the business. So there can be a variety of things that, and at Quiet Light, our job is really, to make sure that you have the best experience possible as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. And if that includes selling now or in the close future, then that's great. But if the right thing is to step back and go fix your business and focus on growth and optimizing for 6 months, a year or longer, then that can be the right call. But to answer your question, as far as most common, I mentioned like some of the things that could be issues, but Chris, do you want to talk about maybe some of the most common or pick it up from there?
Sure. And I when you said, like, when I heard the question that Sam got from the listener, that's the first thing I thought of, Ian, was what you said. It's the P&Ls. Like, if the P&Ls are a mess, or they're kind of, believe it or not, non-existent, which happens, then there's some work up front that really needs to be done to get those created and then get them organized and well documented. So I think that's important. Holes, one thing might be to consider before you start your business or you're getting into it, your online business, what type of online business are you getting into? So, because they're not all created equal from a valuation perspective, they're certainly not. Because, if you could be getting into, and if you want to do an Amazon business, that's great. But you could be getting into it as what we call like a wholesaler, which is really more of a reseller, where you're selling other people's brands, which, the barrier to entry is probably easier. You might be able to get up and running faster. Maybe you're wanting to do Amazon and you wanted to do like arbitrage. Maybe you took a course on how to do that. And so those are options, but just if you can look forward a little bit and think strategically about it, if you ever go to sell one of those businesses, a reseller Amazon business, or maybe like an arbitrage business, something like that, you're going to get a lower valuation and a lower multiple in general than if you have like an Amazon true FBA, FBM private label business. I mean, private label with a true, as I said earlier, kind of customized product with a real brand behind it and a real following. That's going to have a much greater value than just your typical reseller business. So think about that. Think about how, where your passions lie. How important is the exit, which I think should be really important to every seller down the road. Think about the exit. Think about if you have a content site, if you're interested in a specific topic, this isn't, requisite of having to do, what you do in a content site, but think about what you're interested in. Think about what you would like to read. Think about the possibility for, affiliate products on that site. Do you want to, if you have two things that you're interested in, you might want to think about the higher average order value of the products that you're talking about, or the niche that you're talking about. Maybe you would choose that one over the other passion because ultimately it means more dollars to the bottom line. So, the listener asked about holes. I would think that's something that you could really consider before you jump into any type of online business.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you said about you should be thinking about an exit from day one. I mean, that's paraphrased, obviously, but even if I hear that a lot from our team of advisors and even external guests that we have on to these webinars, is that even if you don't think you want to exit, you should just assume that one day you might, because then you'll have all these things in place. And as I think you've said, Ian, already, that just makes your life easier anyway. So there's really no downside. Thank you again for that question. We'll probably wrap up in a couple minutes. If there's any other extra question, we can stay on for a few more minutes. Otherwise, Ian and Chris, are there any last, comments you want to make? I know we've talked about a ton already, about those milestones you should be hitting before you sell your online business, or any anecdotes you want to share from your own personal experiences, that our viewers might benefit from. We have a couple minutes to do that.
Totally. Well, one, I just wanted to, thank all of you for joining us and for asking some really great questions. Like Chris said, this is more fun when it's engaging, and I've, definitely has been. So thank you for asking those questions and for being here, because just by looking at key milestones to hit before selling your business, not only does that help you prepare for a successful exit, but all of this really is super relevant to running your business successfully and growing it successfully. A lot of people kind of think that valuation and what goes into a valuation is really only relevant for when you're selling, but that really is not the case. It is all super relevant in terms of understanding the state of your current business and what you can do to improve it. So whether you plan to sell in a couple months or in a year or 2 years or more, it's really good to think with that mindset of what can I do now to prepare my business to become more valuable. Because if it's more valuable to a potential buyer, it's going to be more valuable to yourself, and you're going to get all those benefits while you're the owner. So commend you all for being here and watching this, because it's really the right mindset to have when you're a business owner. And yeah, appreciate all of your time, and have enjoyed this very much. So Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, Sam, thank you for being an awesome host. You've made this really easy on me, and Ian, I think you'd agree too. And Ian, you've been awesome. The listeners, thank you for, I know time is valuable, so the fact that you would take an hour out of your day to listen to us is really cool. I would say one thing to always consider is you don't want to, as a seller, I never want you to feel pressure to sell. You never want to be in a reactive mode, which again goes back to almost the whole theme of this talk, is being prepared. So if you decide one day that you do want to sell, if you really feel like the recession is looming, it's right around the corner, then you don't then want to be in a position where you're scrambling to get everything prepared. So you might as well just get prepared and then maintain that preparation as you run the business. But that also kind of leads me to, as a kind of a closing deal, like, don't feel panicked. You don't want to feel rushed, forced to sell. Sometimes the best advice I can give a seller is wait. Maybe the best idea is to continue to grow the business. Maybe it's to wait out the impending recession, if there is one. A year and a half, 2 years can fly by, and it can mean all the difference in the world to selling the business and not being in a rush. And that's not just me theorizing on it. I've represented so many sellers where my initial conversation after talking to them was the obvious advice is to wait. I just did a deal with a seller of mine. They contacted me in the summer of 2020, and we waited to list them until almost the beginning of summer of 2021. We waited a year, and it doubled their transaction size. So from like 5 million in valuation to almost double that in a year just by waiting. So something to keep in mind as a seller. You never want to feel overly pressured or reactive in that situation. And there's always another option. So.
That's great. Thank you both so much for hopping on. If you want to let people know where they can reach you in case they want to send some follow-up questions, your email address or whatever the best form of communication is, feel free. Chris, where can people contact you if they have questions after this?
Yeah, they can, I guess, just email me. It's woz@quietlight.com. And then if you email me, I'm pretty approachable and available. So my cell phone is also on there, once you email me and we communicate. So I'm a texter, so you can text me or call me or whatever. But yeah, that's how you can contact me.
Yeah. And for me, my email is ian@quietlight.com, IAN@quietlight. And I'm pretty quick to respond. So feel free to follow up with any emails or questions or anything else, and I'll get back to you. And I also just wanted to second the thanks, Sam. You've been an awesome host and facilitating this. And Chris, you've been great to do this with as well. So thanks both of you and everyone else.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I just updated their names with their emails, so I'll wait a few seconds if you want to jot those down. Thank you all for joining and for all the awesome questions. We'll be back next month with another webinar, so keep an eye out. And we will be sending the recording of this out to all of you, so you'll be able to watch it again. And if you have questions, you can always reach us there as well. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.